So we now live in an era where camera manufacturers are competing over how many megapixels they've got. How much resolution can you get in your photos? But I think maybe a lot of photographers are not asking the question, do I really need tons of resolution? Do I need a super high megapixel camera? Well, the answer is not really, but kind of. And it really just depends on what you do with your photography. In my opinion, the best reason for having a very high resolution, high megapixel camera is the cropping ability. You can either recompose your shot, or if you shot a wide frame, you can actually find compositions within compositions, which I encourage you to do because it's a really good way to improve your compositions and learn how to compose a really nice shot. Crops within crops. Now, the diehards will dictate that you absolutely must get it right in camera at all times. And I think you should strive for that. But I don't think there's any crime in cropping your photo, because even with the best lenses, even with the best cameras, if you're tracking a bird flying across the sky, or you're tracking some kind of crashing wave on the coast, there's a chance that things might quickly change and what you've just framed up doesn't quite line up perfectly. And that's where having a lot more resolution allows you to crop in and waste the pixels that you didn't need just to feature what you do want, and then you've got a spectacular composition like this. Outside of the cropping ability, I'm not sure that you really do need to have lots of megapixels. So this is the OM1 MkII. It's a 20 megapixel camera, and I recently took this out for a spin in the Canadian Rockies, and I was absolutely floored with the results that I could get. Which begs the next question, do you print your images? And if you do, well, how big? If all that you do with your photography is just share it on social media, and there's nothing wrong with that, the chances are you really do not need a high megapixel camera. You could probably get away with something like this, or even the 12 megapixel Sony a7S III, I think they're on right now. Brilliant camera. 12 megapixels. You're far better off spending your money on a camera that has the features that you want. Maybe you need something small and lightweight. Maybe you need crazy weatherproofing, or maybe you're just buying on price and you need something that's relatively affordable. In over a decade of shooting professionally, I can give you my honest opinion, and that is that if you're going to pump your dollars into something, you're far better off pumping your dollars into high quality lenses, or if you need it, a camera that has really good dynamic range. Now, if you don't know what I mean by dynamic range, basically what I mean is high contrast images like this have a lot of detail in the highlights and in the shadows. So if you have a camera like this, which is the Hasselblad X2D medium format camera that has 15 stops of dynamic range, in most cases you might be able to shoot that image in just one frame without bracketing. Whereas with this camera, which is the OM1 MkII, even though it's pretty good with 13.5 stops of dynamic range, I'll probably need to bracket my images so that I don't blow out my highlights or lose detail in my shadows, and then I'll have to do a bit more work in post to edit the image and blend those exposures so that I end up with a high dynamic range image. And if you want to learn more about exposure blending, check out my course, Exposure Blending Simplified. But depending on your style of photography, you might not need tons of dynamic range. So in that case, I would say that your primary focus should be on the glass. Spend as much money as you can on lenses rather than the camera. So to give you an example, this is the OM1 MkII Micro Four Thirds 20 megapixel camera. And you can see right here, this is the 7-14 wide angle lens, which it's a decent lens, but it's not the sharpest wide angle lens that I've used. And I think it's priced at something like 1,400 Canadian dollars. Now, with the same camera, but this lens, the 150 to 400 millimeter lens, which is 10,000 Canadian dollars, the difference in sharpness it's off the charts. It's extremely significant, as it should be because of that massive price difference. So let me just show you these raw files on the computer and I'll show you exactly what I mean. Alright, so I'm going to show you these two raw files, the same camera, two different lenses, just so that you can see the difference that an investment in glass makes. So this is a wide angle shot. Let's just double click on that. Now bear in mind, I'm using the same shooting technique with both scenarios. The only real difference is the wide angle shot has a 2-second timer, so there's no vibrations on the camera, and the super telephoto has a 12-second timer, just to let that vibration dissipate. So let's just zoom in so that you can look at the edges of this image. Let's zoom into 100%. So looking at these edges here, you can see that that's actually not too bad, but I've added quite a bit of sharpening to it. If I switch that off, you should see it gets a little bit softer. In fact, let's just take that all the way down to about there. That has 0 sharpening on the image. Now, if I'd shot this as a JPEG, the JPEG processing would have added a bit of sharpening to it. So it would have shown up in Adobe Camera Raw looking a lot sharper. So you have to add a little bit of sharpening to it just for it to look about right. But that actually looks quite good. So I don't think that that's bad. It's not the sharpest wide angle lens that I've ever used, but it's not bad at all. So let's just click done. And now we're gonna go to look at the telephoto image. So I'll just double click on this and let's zoom into 100%. And I don't know about you, and I'm hoping that this shows up on this video that I've uploaded to YouTube. By the time I've uploaded it, it's heavily compressed. But that is in a different league of sharpness as far as I can tell. I mean, look at these crisp edges here. You can see I've added some sharpening. Let's switch that off entirely. That's with no sharpening and no noise reduction. I switch it back on and you can see it looks a lot cleaner, but let's just pull that down to somewhere like that. Let's make these settings a little bit more subtle, but that looks so clean, so crisp and so sharp compared to that super wide angle lens.
Now, just so I don't get trolled by the grandmother's basement dwellers, here they are side by side. Both are magnified by the same amount, and I added the exact same subtle sharpening settings to both. Now, if you can't tell the difference on this compressed video, you'll just have to take me word for it.
And that is the difference that $8,600 makes. Unbelievable. Now, this lens actually goes up to the equivalent of 1000 millimeters on a full frame camera because it has a built-in teleconverter, which it just absolutely blows me away. So for me, it's almost difficult to accept that I'm looking at a 20 megapixel RAW file there, because I'm so used to looking at 100 megapixel super high resolution images from this thing. You know, I admit that I may have been a little bit snobby in the past, thinking, yeah, a 20 megapixel Micro Four Thirds is not really going to cut it in the resolution department. But this absolutely proves me to be full of shit. Now, what if I wanted to print a really large print of this image? It's only 20 megapixels, right? The larger that the print gets, the further away you have to stand so that you can take in the whole image. I mean, you can walk right up to it and pixel peep just for detail, but if you do that, you can't see the whole image. And most people, when they're viewing a piece of art, they want to see the entire piece of art. So realistically, how close are you going to get? And these days, with the upscaling technology of software like Topaz Photo AI or Topaz Gigapixel, or even just built into Photoshop and Lightroom, you can upscale your images to be pretty much whatever you want, as long as you have a sharp, clean image, and that is going to come from your glass. But just for shits and giggles, let's load this into Topaz Photo AI and you'll see what you can get away with. This will blow your mind. So what you're looking at now is Topaz Photo AI. This is what I use to upscale and sharpen my images. Now, before I add all of these enhancements that you can do to your image, the top tip I'll give you when you're using Topaz is you will always get better results if you add your denoise, your sharpening, and your upscale to a RAW file. So I've done this both ways in the past. I've up-resed and cleaned up a finished image that I've exposure blended and focus stacked, and that's always turned out pretty well, but you'll have a much cleaner process if you do it at the RAW file stage. Now, I know that's going to be difficult if you're doing exposure blending, but if you're just doing one single frame, this is how I would do it. I would start with the RAW file. So we've got the RAW file here. Let's add denoise. there isn't really that much noise in the image. There's just a little bit of noise in this cloud here. The next thing I want to do is add a bit of sharpening. Now that might be a bit much. Let's just pull that down to about there so it's not quite so aggressive. And I'll go back to the denoise actually, and I'll just increase the original detail there, because really I don't want it to take detail away from this mountaintop, but I do want it to take detail away from the cloud, right? There is no detail in that cloud. And then the last step is to upscale. So I'm going to click on upscale, and this is going to essentially double my resolution, so I could print a fairly large version of this image. And look at that. Where's it getting this detail from? I don't understand. Now it looks a little bit artificial because I'm zoomed in at something absolutely ridiculous. So let's just zoom out to something like that and see how that looks. And just to make things look a little bit clearer, let me just also add, I don't usually do this, but I'll do adjust lightening, just to make it a little bit brighter. It's just unbelievable what you can do with this software. And so full disclosure, I am a Topaz affiliate. So if you're interested in picking up a copy of Topaz Photo AI, I've got an affiliate link in the description, which helps to support this channel. Okay, so now looking at that, let's just click over here. You can see the original was just over 5,000 pixels on its longest side, and the output, the new version that's been upscaled, is almost double that. So I could now print a fairly large version of this 20 megapixel image. So do you really need a super high megapixel camera? Well, you don't really. You just need good glass and some post-processing chops like these. But will I be giving up my 100 megapixel 15 stops of dynamic range anytime soon? No, not a chance. Because the reason is I just love using this camera, and I love the luxury of being able to just quickly edit the images and not worry too much about dynamic range. But if I was just starting out and I was on a budget, I absolutely would give serious consideration to something like this OM1 MkII. And then when my career took off, I'd probably splash the cash on that 150 to 400mm bazooka.